Most people think Ecuador is just another beautiful South American country with beaches, mountains, and the Galápagos Islands. But what if I told you this country has animals that never learned to fear humans, a famous equator line built in the wrong place, and a mountain technically closer to outer space than Mount Everest? Today, we're exploring 21 Ecuador facts that feel almost unreal. Fact 1. The country that uses America's money. Ecuador is one of the few countries in the world that does not use its own national currency. Instead, people pay with the United States dollar every day, whether they are buying bananas at a local market, paying for a taxi in Quito, or grabbing seafood near the Pacific coast. The switch happened in the early 2000s after Ecuador experienced a severe financial crisis and inflation damaged the country's economy. Before that, Ecuador used its own currency called the sucre. Many people feared the change at first because replacing a national currency can feel like giving up a piece of national identity. Surprisingly, dollarization helped stabilize prices and restored confidence in the economy. Today, Ecuador even produces its own coins called centavos, which have Ecuadorian designs but hold the same value as American coins. It creates a strange and fascinating situation where George Washington and Ecuadorian symbols quietly share the same wallet. Fact 2. A country named after an invisible line. Ecuador is one of the very few countries on Earth whose entire name comes directly from geography. The word Ecuador means equator in Spanish, named after the imaginary line that divides the northern and southern hemispheres. Most countries are named after tribes, historical kingdoms, famous leaders, or ancient words lost in time. Ecuador instead looked at a line humans cannot even physically see and said, "Yes, that one." The equator passes through the country near the capital city of Quito, creating a rare geographic identity few places can claim. It sounds simple at first, but it gives Ecuador something unusual. The nation itself is named after one of the most important reference points on Earth. School textbooks, maps, globes, and navigation systems all use the equator as a fundamental measurement. Ecuador turned a geography lesson into a national identity, which is probably one of the boldest naming decisions any country ever made. Fact 3. The Equator Monument that missed the equator. One of Ecuador's most famous attractions delivers a surprise that many visitors never expect. Near Quito stands the famous Mitad del Mundo monument, which means middle of the world. Thousands of tourists arrive every year hoping to stand exactly on the equator with 1 foot in each hemisphere. There is only one small problem. Modern satellite technology later revealed that the monument was built in the wrong place. The actual equator line sits roughly several hundred feet away from the monument itself. Earlier measurements relied on older calculations and equipment that seemed accurate at the time, but modern GPS systems eventually exposed the mistake. Today, tourists often visit both locations, taking photos at the famous monument and then walking to the more scientifically accurate spot nearby. It creates a funny situation where one of the world's most famous geographic landmarks accidentally became one of geography's most famous plotting errors. Fact 4. 4 worlds inside one small country. Ecuador may look relatively small on a world map, but stepping across the country can feel like traveling through several different nations at once. The country is divided into 4 completely distinct natural regions. First comes the Pacific coast, filled with beaches, fishing towns, tropical heat, and busy port cities. Then there are the Andes Mountains, where high-altitude cities sit among volcanoes and dramatic valleys. East of the mountains lies the Amazon region, covered by dense rainforest and extraordinary wildlife. Finally, far out in the Pacific Ocean, sit the Galápagos Islands, famous for landscapes and animals found almost nowhere else on Earth. Few countries can move from ocean beaches to snow-covered volcanic peaks, then into jungle wilderness and remote islands within such a short distance. For travelers, Ecuador sometimes feels less like one country and more like four completely different worlds stitched together on a surprisingly small piece of land. Fact 5. A tiny country with giant biodiversity. Ecuador is not a large country, yet scientists often describe it as one of the most biologically rich places on Earth. The reason is not simply the number of animals or plants, but how much diversity exists in such a small area. In many countries, travelers may drive for hours before the environment changes significantly. In Ecuador, landscapes can transform rapidly from coastal regions to mountains, cloud forests, rainforests, and volcanic terrain. These dramatic changes in altitude and climate create thousands of different habitats packed closely together. As a result, Ecuador contains an astonishing concentration of life. Researchers regularly discover species that exist nowhere else on the planet. New frogs, orchids, insects, and reptiles still appear during scientific studies. This means Ecuador is not only preserving biodiversity from the past. In some ways, it still feels like a place where nature continues writing new chapters today. Fact 6. The bird kingdom, hidden in South America. Ecuador has earned a remarkable reputation among birdwatchers because this relatively small country contains more bird species than the entire United States and Canada combined. At first, that sounds almost impossible. After all, the United States and Canada together cover enormous territories stretching across mountains, deserts, forests, tundra, and coastlines. Ecuador, by comparison, looks tiny on a map. The secret lies in geography and elevation. Tropical climates combined with dramatic altitude changes create countless environments where different species can thrive. Hummingbirds flash through cloud forests, colorful toucans move through rainforest canopies, giant condors soar above Andean peaks, and exotic parrots fill Amazon skies with noise and color. Some visitors travel to Ecuador carrying cameras with enormous lenses, hoping to capture birds found nowhere else. For many wildlife enthusiasts, Ecuador is less a vacation destination and more a treasure hunt with feathers. Fact 7. The mountain closest to space. Most people assume that the tallest mountain on Earth must also be the point farthest from the center of the planet. That sounds logical, but Ecuador quietly breaks that assumption. The summit of Mount Chimborazo holds a surprising distinction because of Earth's shape. Our planet is not a perfect sphere. It bulges slightly around the equator and becomes flatter near the poles. Since Ecuador sits close to the equator, Mount Chimborazo starts from a part of Earth that already extends farther outward. As a result, the mountain's peak reaches a point farther from Earth's center than the summit of Mount Everest. Everest still remains the tallest mountain above sea level, but Chimborazo wins a different and stranger competition. Technically speaking, if astronauts wanted to stand at the point on Earth closest to outer space while keeping their feet on the ground, Ecuador would quietly steal the victory. Fact 8. The country built on fire. Ecuador sits directly along the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most geologically active regions on Earth. This enormous zone stretches around the Pacific Ocean and contains many of the world's volcanoes and earthquake zones. Because of its location, Ecuador lives with powerful underground forces constantly shaping the landscape. The country contains dozens of volcanoes scattered across valleys and mountain ranges, creating scenery that often looks almost unreal. Some volcanoes rise high above the clouds and can even be seen from major cities. Over thousands of years, eruptions helped create fertile land that later supported farming and human settlements. At the same time, volcanic activity remains a constant reminder that nature still controls the rules. Living in Ecuador sometimes means waking up to beautiful snow-covered peaks on the horizon while quietly remembering that some of those mountains are very much alive beneath the surface. Fact 9. Volcanoes under constant watch. In Ecuador, some volcanoes are monitored every single day because scientists know that these mountains can change behavior surprisingly quickly. Unlike ordinary mountains, active volcanoes are constantly sending signals from deep underground. Researchers track tiny earthquakes, underground pressure, gas emissions, temperature changes, and even small movements in the ground itself. Special monitoring stations sit around major volcanoes, collecting information day and night. One of the most closely watched examples is Cotopaxi, one of the world's highest active volcanoes. Even when it appears calm and peaceful from a distance, scientists continue observing every detail. Modern technology allows experts to detect warning signs long before major activity begins. It creates a fascinating reality where volcanoes in Ecuador are treated almost like living patients in a giant hospital, with specialists checking their condition every day and waiting for the next update from beneath Earth's surface. Fact 10. Forests that create their own weather. Deep in Ecuador's cloud forests, nature performs something that almost feels like a magic trick. These forests do not simply experience weather. In some ways, they actually help create it. Located high along mountain slopes, cloud forests sit at elevations where warm air rises and collides with cooler temperatures. As moist air moves upward, clouds begin forming directly around the trees themselves. Thick fog drifts through branches, moss hangs from trunks, and moisture gathers on leaves day after day. Instead of relying only on rainfall from above, plants can absorb water directly from mist and passing clouds. Entire ecosystems survive because of this constant exchange between vegetation and atmosphere. Walking through these forests often feels less like entering a jungle and more like stepping inside a living cloud. The strange part is that the trees are not just passive scenery. They actively participate in maintaining the very environment around them. Fact 11. Islands slowly sailing away. The famous Galápagos Islands of Ecuador may look ancient and motionless, but they are actually moving very slowly across the Pacific Ocean. Beneath the islands, powerful geological forces continue working far below the surface. The Galápagos formed above a volcanic hotspot deep inside Earth, where molten rock rises upward and creates new land over enormous periods of time. Meanwhile, the tectonic plate beneath the islands keeps drifting across the ocean. This means the older islands gradually move away, while new volcanic activity can eventually create younger islands elsewhere. It is almost like a giant conveyor belt operating at an incredibly slow speed. Humans never notice movement during a lifetime, but over millions of years, the changes become dramatic. The strange result is that the Galapagos Islands are not permanent frozen landmarks. They are travelers, quietly sailing across the Pacific, just moving at a speed that geology understands better than people do. Fact 12. Animals that never learned to fear humans. The Galapagos Islands, gave scientists one of the strangest wildlife observations on Earth. Many animals there evolved with almost no natural fear of people. For thousands of years, these isolated islands had very few land predators, which meant animals never developed the survival instincts seen elsewhere. Birds often allow humans to approach surprisingly closely. Marine iguanas relax on rocks without panic. Sea lions nap beside walkways, and giant tortoises continue their slow journey as if tourists barely exist. For first-time visitors, it can feel almost unreal because animals in most places quickly run away. The isolation of the islands created a different reality where survival depended less on escaping danger and more on adapting to a stable environment. Ironically, when humans eventually arrived, the animals were biologically unprepared for this new type of visitor. Nature had written the rules for one world, then suddenly introduced a completely different one. Fact 13. The tortoises that outlive generations. Ecuador is home to some of the most famous, long-living animals on Earth, the giant tortoises of the Galápagos Islands. These enormous reptiles can survive for astonishing lengths of time, sometimes living well beyond a century. In rare cases, some individuals have reached ages that allow them to outlive multiple generations of human families. Imagine a tortoise being born before your grandparents and still calmly walking around today. Unlike fast-moving animals that depend on speed or aggression, giant tortoises survive through a slower strategy. Their metabolism works gradually, their movements are unhurried, and their entire lifestyle seems built around patience. They spend much of their lives eating vegetation, resting, and moving across landscapes at a pace that would make modern city life seem completely absurd. Looking at one can feel strangely surreal, almost like meeting a quiet witness from another era that simply decided to ignore humanity's rush through time. Fact 14. Chocolate older than history books. Most people associate chocolate with Europe, candy stores, or modern desserts, but Ecuador helped rewrite that story. Archaeological discoveries revealed some of the oldest known evidence of cacao use ever found anywhere on Earth. Researchers studying ancient remains in the Ecuadorian Amazon discovered traces suggesting people were using cacao thousands of years ago, long before many historians previously believed. This finding surprised scientists because conventional theories often connected the origins of cacao more strongly with later civilizations farther north. Suddenly, Ecuador entered the conversation as one of the earliest places where humans may have cultivated and used this remarkable plant. Imagine ancient communities preparing early cacao beverages, while large parts of the world were still developing basic societies. It changes the image of chocolate entirely. Instead of beginning as a sweet snack, cacao may have started its journey in Ecuador as something mysterious, valuable, and deeply connected to early human culture. Fact 15. The flower empire few people notice. When people think about Ecuador's exports, flowers are usually not the first thing that comes to mind. Yet Ecuador quietly became one of the world's biggest rose exporters and supplies flowers to countries across the planet. Around holidays such as Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, and other major celebrations, millions of roses begin journeys from Ecuadorian farms toward international markets. The country's geography creates almost perfect conditions for growing exceptional flowers. High-altitude locations near the equator provide strong sunlight and stable temperatures throughout the year. This unusual combination allows roses to grow larger stems and brighter colors than many competing regions. Walking through flower farms can feel almost unreal because endless fields of color stretch toward mountain landscapes in the distance. Somewhere in the world, a bouquet handed to someone during a romantic dinner or celebration may have quietly started its journey on the slopes of Ecuador's Andes Mountains. Fact 16. The shrimp superpower nobody saw coming. When people think about global seafood giants, Ecuador rarely enters the conversation first. Surprisingly, the country quietly transformed itself into one of the most powerful shrimp exporters on the planet. Along Ecuador's Pacific coast, enormous shrimp farms stretch across coastal regions and produce massive quantities for international markets. Over time, shrimp became one of Ecuador's most important export industries, and now reaches dinner tables across Asia, North America, Europe, and many other regions. What makes the story unusual is how quickly the industry expanded compared with traditional expectations. Many people still associate Ecuador mainly with bananas, volcanoes, or the Galápagos Islands. Meanwhile, an entirely different economic success story was developing in the background. Today, someone enjoying shrimp in a restaurant thousands of miles away may have absolutely no idea that their meal quietly began its journey in the warm coastal waters of Ecuador. Fact 17. The guinea pig on the dinner table. For many visitors, one of Ecuador's most surprising cultural experiences arrives not in the mountains or jungles, but on a dinner plate. In several regions of the country, especially in the Andes, guinea pig has been a traditional food for centuries. Known locally as cuy, it was an important source of protein long before European settlers arrived in South America. While many people in other countries think of guinea pigs as small household pets, indigenous communities historically viewed them very differently. Families often raised them inside homes, where they reproduced quickly and required little space. Today, cuy remains connected to celebrations, traditions, and local identity in certain areas. For tourists, seeing roasted guinea pigs served at a restaurant can create genuine culture shock. It becomes one of those moments that reminds travelers an important truth. What feels completely normal in one part of the world can seem incredibly unexpected somewhere else. Fact 18. The night Ecuador burns giant dolls. New Year celebrations in Ecuador include one of the most unusual traditions found anywhere in the world. On the final night of the year, people across the country build and burn large dolls known as Años Viejos, which translates to old years. These figures are often made from paper, cardboard, old clothes, and stuffed materials. Some represent politicians, celebrities, movie characters, sports figures, or events that dominated headlines during the year. Families and neighborhoods place them outside homes and gather around as midnight approaches. Once the clock strikes 12, the dolls are set on fire as a symbolic way of leaving the past behind and beginning a fresh chapter. The atmosphere can feel part festival, part street party, and part giant theatrical performance. Imagine walking through a city where enormous figures suddenly appear on sidewalks only to vanish into flames a few hours later. It feels less like a traditional holiday and more like a nationwide farewell ceremony for the previous year. Fact 19. Quito's Christmas streets, once filled with roller skaters. Ecuador has one of the strangest Christmas traditions you will probably never see in most parts of the world. Families, children, and groups of friends would travel through certain areas of the city during festive celebrations, creating scenes that looked more like a parade on wheels than a traditional holiday gathering. Streets occasionally filled with people wearing holiday clothing while moving together through the city. For many visitors, the image felt surreal because roller skates and Christmas rarely appear in the same sentence. While traditions changed over time and evolved across different neighborhoods, Quito gained a reputation for one of South America's most unexpected holiday customs. Ecuador once again proved that even familiar celebrations can take very unusual forms. Fact 20. The train route that terrified travelers. Ecuador once operated one of the most dramatic and intimidating railway routes on Earth. Deep in the Andes Mountains, engineers built a section of track famously known as the Devil's Nose. The name alone already sounds like something from an adventure movie, and the scenery only adds to that feeling. Constructing the railway required workers to carve tracks into nearly vertical mountain walls, surrounded by dangerous cliffs and extreme terrain. The route became legendary because trains had to zigzag back and forth down steep slopes to manage the descent. For years, passengers experienced breathtaking views mixed with genuine fear as trains moved along narrow mountain edges high above valleys below. Stories about the route spread internationally and transformed it into one of Ecuador's most famous engineering achievements. Riding the railway was not simply transportation. It felt more like entering a real-life mountain survival story, where beautiful scenery and danger traveled side by side. Fact 21. Languages older than Spanish still survive. Long before Spanish explorers arrived in South America, Ecuador was already home to diverse indigenous civilizations with their own languages, traditions, and identities. Surprisingly, several of these languages continue to survive today, especially in mountain and Amazon regions. In some communities, indigenous languages remain part of daily life and are spoken at home, in schools, local markets, and cultural events. One of the most widely known examples is Quechua, which developed from the larger Quechua language family once connected to the Inca world. For many communities, language is more than communication. It carries stories, beliefs, history, and ways of understanding life itself. Preserving these languages has become increasingly important because every language contains unique knowledge passed through generations. In a rapidly modernizing world, Ecuador quietly protects voices that existed long before the first Spanish words ever echoed across the Andes Mountains. The strange thing about Ecuador is that even after 21 facts, it still feels like we barely scratched the surface. A country with moving islands, giant tortoises older than generations of people, and Christmas roller skating traditions somehow keeps getting stranger the deeper you go. So tell me in the comments, which fact sounded completely fake even though it turned out to be real? I read every comment, and your answer might inspire the next destination.